Hey everyone, how are you doing? Today I wanted to give another update about Bali reopening. I think that so many people are really anxious to come back and visit this beautiful island, and there's been a lot of conflicting and new information, as we knew would happen, that's been coming out over the last few days. So in this video I want to give you the latest news and also give you a bit of a life update about me at the very end. If you're interested in that, stick around. I'm Adrian Field. I'm an expat entrepreneur that's been living in Bali for the last 3 years, and I have not even been off this island in 2.5 years, as I said in the video prior to this. Now, let's talk about what's going on with tourism in Bali. So, as we know, the government announced that as of February 4th, tourism is now allowed back into Bali. However, there is a big caveat, and that has now come into clarification over the last week or so. First of all, I was wrong. There are no visa on arrivals being issued. What you used to be able to do is just rock up to the Bali airport basically and get a free 30-day visa if you're from most countries, or you could choose to pay for a 30-day extendable visa that would be extendable up to 60 days, also a visa on arrival. That is not the case. You need to have basically what used to be called a social visa in advance, which requires a sponsor, which requires a certain amount of money, and the validity of that visa is initially 60 days and extendable every 30 days up to 6 months. So that is the kind of visa that you would need as of now to enter Bali. Furthermore, as we know and as was already discussed, you need to be fully vaccinated, meaning both doses of whatever vaccine you've had. And not only that, but you still need to quarantine for 5 days. Now, the quarantine situation in Bali is quite weird, or unique, I guess I should say. They've only selected 5-star hotels for the quarantine, which means for 5 days that can really add up. But apparently these hotels are like bubbles, where you're not confined to your room. You're actually allowed to use all of the resort facilities like the gym, the pool, etc. And the staff at that hotel is also quarantining there as well. Now, if that didn't already turn you off from wanting to visit Bali, the governor of Bali just yesterday announced some very weird news that has a lot of people freaking out. Basically because everybody I know is coming down with probably Omicron or something. But the governor announced yesterday that anybody who tests positive for the virus has to be isolated in a government quarantine facility. Now, this is just absolutely crazy because, for example, me, I live in a really big house. When I was sick last month with either the flu or something, I just stayed at home for 10 days. I didn't leave my house. So they're not giving you that option, but it's quite strange because they don't even have many beds in whatever government facility. So if, God forbid, you were to arrive in Bali and you test positive in your quarantine, they may move you to, some government quarantine facility. That to me is really, really scary. So the government, I feel, is sending a lot of mixed messages. It's saying like, yes, Bali is kind of open, but at the same time, not really, because you have to jump through a million hoops. You have to do a 5-day quarantine. They scare the hell out of you about if you test positive and then you have to be in some isolation ward of a government place. I mean, in all of those things would really make me as a tourist not want to come to Bali. Now, quite the opposite, I am actually finally getting ready to leave Bali for the first time in 2.5 years. As I announced in my last video, and as many people may be aware, Singapore Airlines is resuming its daily service back and forth from Singapore to Bali starting February 16th. I'm not flying on Singapore Air. However, I am flying on the first direct flight from Bali to Istanbul on Turkish Airlines on March 2nd. That's actually the day before Nyepi, the Balinese Day of Silence. I'm really actually hoping and praying that that flight, which I already have a ticket for, will actually take off, because if there is probably no passengers coming in, then that flight might get canceled and they might have to reroute me through Jakarta. And the whole thing is that I do not want to fly domestically in Indonesia, because then you have to do a PCR test. And one of the great things about many countries that are reopening is that if you are already fully vaccinated, you don't even need to do a PCR test or an antigen test or any other kind of test. And Turkey is one of those countries. So I can just hypothetically and hopefully fly direct from Bali into Istanbul. I'm already vaccinated, show my certificate, no problem. and start my trip. Now, again, Bali is not the case. Besides being vaccinated, you also need to test negative before your arrival, and I believe that you also need to test negative at the end of your quarantine. So they really are making it very, very challenging. However, I do think that, as I said before, the government is being, for some reason, extremely cautious, but they have some big events coming up, and I think that they're just trying to sort of test the waters and see how these things go, and then will hopefully liberalize their requirements for entry over time. In the news, it's reported that Bill Gates is actually supposed to be visiting Bali in April, and I have a very, very hard time believing that Indonesia would make Bill Gates quarantine in a facility for 5 days or in a hotel for 5 days. So I think that over the next month or so, things will become easier, and that's why finally I have the confidence to actually leave Bali after all of this time, because I do really hope and believe that by the time I am ready to return, as I said, Bali is my home, that the quarantine requirements will either be dropped or will be reduced to something minimal. I mean, hopefully no more than 3 days. So that is the most up-to-date information. There are only five-star hotels right now in which you can quarantine in Bali. I'll put that information down in the description below so you can have a look into it. But again, they are kind of weeding out the backpackers, the people who would be coming to Bali for a party and not spending a lot of money, because who otherwise can afford to spend 5 days in a five-star hotel just at the beginning of your trip and then be able to move on to the rest of it. So I doubt very strongly there will be many tourists coming into the island. That is sort of my fear about whether or not my flight will even come in from Istanbul. But on the other hand, the very first flight carrying tourists into Bali from Japan was only carrying 12 passengers, and I think half of them were actually Indonesian anyway. So we'll see what happens in the coming days and the coming weeks. I'll also just give you a little information right now what the vibe is in Bali if you're still really, really wanting to come. Canggu seems to be the only place that has any life on the island, and it's quite frankly not the kind of life that I want to intermingle with every time I go in there, because I have certain things I just have to do in Canggu I can't do around here in my neighborhood. Those people are what they are, and they have not left the island like me in a very long time. Anywhere else is going to be pretty dead and pretty quiet. Seminyak, Kuta, etc. So many things have closed down. So many restaurants are shut. So it is a bit of a strange vibe. As I said in my previous video, on one hand, you could have a chance to explore the island in a way that maybe you've never seen it before, without the over-tourism and without the traffic and the overcrowding and things like that. Also, obviously, prices for resorts and for stays and for almost everything is going to be less than what you would normally pay, because, again, the demand right now for tourism is very, very low. So that is the latest on the Bali tourism update. I hope that everybody is doing really well. For me, I'm very, very excited to actually finally leave this island in 2.5 years. I haven't decided for how long I'm going to be away. I think I'm just going to continue to monitor the situation on a day-by-day basis as the quarantine things develop. But of course, me being a resident of Indonesia, I won't have any issues coming in. It's just, again, I want to avoid this 5-day quarantine and all of this craziness. On the good side of things, and what I'm really excited about, is that Australia just announced they're reopening for tourism in a couple weeks, and followers of my channel know that I love Australia. It's probably my favorite country in the whole world, so I'm thinking about potentially even going there before I would even come back to Bali. So I think that the world is reopening, and Indonesia needs to get on the bus with that and reopen fully so that people can get on with their lives. So thank you guys for watching this video. I hope it was helpful to you. And I do hope to see you guys at some point here in Bali being able to come in with no quarantine and no crazy visas. Until the next time, take care, and I'll see you later.